So, hey, this is Mark Divine, and this is the Mark Divine Show. New format. I'm sitting here with my awesome daughter, Catherine Divine, one of my favorite people on the planet. And we are going to be talking about topics that are interesting to us. Hopefully for you too. That would be the ideal. If not, you probably won't be listening for very long.
Interesting and important.
Or watching. So this is kind of an evolution of the solo cast that I used to do in the past. Maybe sometimes I'll do a solo cast, and that's going to be like when I start talking and you're like, I have no idea what he's saying.
And I'm just listening. Let him I'll just sit here and space out.
Sit here and space out. You can just meditate. So I want, the point here is to have these be fun, engaging, get you to think a little bit differently, maybe out of the box, shed some perspectives that maybe are uncommon, which is the title of my new book, by the way.
It's a great book.
Today, guess what? Toxic positivity.
Toxic positivity.
You're so awesome, Catholic.
Thanks.
Incredible.
You're awesome. I'm feeling absolutely fantastic
You're feeling
today.
fantastic today? It's just an amazing day, isn't it?
So
here's a definition. Dysfunctional emotional management without acknowledging negative emotions. Okay.
So what do you think right when you read that?
So what is coming to me is it's not allowed to have negative emotions. So I'm going to pretend they don't exist. I'm going to block them. I'm going to suppress them. I'm going to deny them. And therefore, I'm going to reap some unhealthy mental and emotional side effects from that. So that's what comes up to me. How about you? I mean, there's a lot more. We're going to talk about this.
Yeah, I immediately go to, the denial piece of like, if I have a negative emotion or a negative thought, pretending it's not there, telling it doesn't belong there, totally denying it, right?
Right.
Or in conversation, like trying to autocorrect somebody else. If I hear them being negative, like shifting, like, well, you could do it this way. So like not allowing someone to have an experience of negativity because it makes me uncomfortable.
I think there's a lot of misconceptions about this. Even in Unveiled Mind, we talk about feeding the courage wolf, starving fear, don't give the negative the attention. And I think it's probably we should shed some light on that because I'm not suggesting that negative emotions aren't real or they don't need to be experienced because they do, right? Otherwise, they get trapped and they get stuck. And that kind of denial of those emotions can lead to feelings of shame and guilt, probably even anxiety, and exacerbate depression and things that are just like dysregulated emotional state because you're not allowing that energy to flow.
Well, that's like a huge one for me because, growing up with somebody who was all about positive thinking as a primary caregiver, if I said something like I can't do something or I didn't feel well, I was told that, well, you're choosing that.
Right.
And so I immediately felt shame and I immediately felt like something was wrong with me. And now, at 47 years old, I still do that to myself. Like where if I'm having a negative experience or I'm having a negative emotion, I think I'm choosing it. And that something's really wrong with me and I'm like failing at life. And it's like a really dark place to go quickly, even though with all my tools, it's like.
Right. Now, this is interesting because this can be learned behavior through modeling or like I said, a caregiver basically telling you can't feel a certain way or you're not allowed to feel certain. That happened to me in my case as well. So I had a little bit of narcissism going on in my family of origin. And, anytime that I would express something negative, I was told I wasn't feeling that way.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, you're not feeling that. You're actually, you're feeling something else. I'm like, okay, maybe I am. And then I wasn't able to really appreciate what I was feeling and to let it flow. Emotion's like energy in motion.
Yeah.
I love that. Right. So if it's not moving through you, then what's it doing?
It's getting stuck.
It's getting stuck.
Yep.
And that's going to lead to, it's probably going to be different for everything in every situation, but definitely some sort of dysregulation and health issues come from dysregulation.
Yeah. Well, yeah, like
out of balance.
There's that emotional piece, like I was saying, it's like the component of being aware. As an adult, I can be aware, That's the inner dialogue, and then like what we talk about in Unbeatable Mind, then I can navigate that, right? And not stay stuck in shame. So I think that's the difference between toxic positivity, total denial that this is happening. I'm going to walk around.
Feed the courage wolf. There's no negativity. And even, sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no.
Even using the tools like the worm process. I witness it, I interdict it, I redirect it, and I maintain it. Extremely useful.
Yep.
When you have to be positive in performance.
Yep.
But it doesn't mean you don't come back and address the underlying issue, right? You have to get back at what was triggered or what the negative emotion was.
Yeah, and it's going to leak out. Like that's the other part is when people do that, it's felt by others. And so something doesn't feel right. Yeah. And so then that's toxic in itself, back to kind of those dynamics of family systems, right? Like the dysfunctional family system. Everything's great. We're all great. Don't tell anybody anything's wrong, So you learn to like hide and like, be in that space. You see it in the spiritual community a lot, in the yoga community.
For sure.
In, I think, like, again, religious communities, any community where we're looking at like it's all love, it's all light.
Yeah, you have to act a certain way, and it's got a certain
like put on the
certain wrapper. I call it the happy glad wrapper.
Happy glad. So great, and so like that's the other thing is I remember talking about that around gratitude because like of course like doing gratitude every day, right? So grateful to be alive, grateful for water. That's all real. And if I'm feeling really sad, I also am grateful I'm sad.
I love that.
And that's something I sit with.
It's okay to be grateful to be sad or to be grateful for the pain in our lives.
Yeah, because it's contrast. It's like, how would I even know what happipiness is if I didn't know what sadness was?
Right.
How would I know what gratitude is if I didn't know how to totally be like upset about it and
in
like
a way,
disregarding of something?
So toxic positivity is denying literally half of your existence.
Yep.
The shadow or the dark, right?
Yeah.
The yin and the yang, they both have to coexist. And one sheds light in the other, and one, the light will dispel the darkness if you allow it to. But denying it keeps the darkness trapped. That's an interesting perspective. I love what you're saying about the caregiver because I want to go back to like narcissism, and there's an overlap, maybe the idea of narcissism is inclusive of toxic positivity, because narcissists both can promote toxic positivity and they can also gaslight you and not allow you to feel your emotions, like in your case or in my case, in which case then you're going to end up suffering as a result of their narcissistic toxic positivity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the part of it, and this kind of goes into the teaching around meditation too, that, I know you teach a lot about and that like we've taught together is like, this whole you can choose your thought. Well, then that already is like, at least what I was told, that perpetuates that I am my thinking instead of like, this is a thought and it's going to pass. And back to like what you're saying, energy and motion. This is an emotion. It's going to flow.
Right. And it's that ownership. I think you just hit on a really important point that's like both for emotional and spiritual development is this non-attachment, right? So emotions come and emotions go. They're like waves crashing in the ocean, on the shore. Thoughts come and thoughts go. Thoughts and emotions are like cousins, you know what I mean? Or sister and brother, right? Yeah. One is felt experience that you cognize and usually attach meaning to. The other is a cognized, kind of verbalized experience. Sometimes it comes with emotions or feelings, but sometimes it doesn't.
Right.
But they're both part of the thinking. Thoughts happen. And the problem lies, most suffering comes in, this is what the spiritual tradition teach, because you take it personally.
That's right.
And you think, oh, this is my thought. I'm such a bad person. I shouldn't be having this emotion. I'm not a kind of person who experiences anger or fear. I was told that's bad.
Yep.
And so you take it personally.
Yep.
And a lot of people hearing this is like, how else could I take it? Well, you can be like, that's just a thought.
Right.
That's not who I am.
Right. And it's a perspective. Like
because it's not who you are.
That's the other piece back to the, like on that topic of toxic positivity. I was walking with our neighbor the other day, and I was saying, one of the things, because I was like frustrated about something that was going on in my life, I was looking at the perspective, looking at all the emotions that are coming with it. And then I was like, well, what if I told the story totally different? And see, I think that's not toxic positivity. That's actually shifting perspective. Like maybe I'm stuck in one or two ways of looking at this, and there's actually like at least 10 more ways that I could tell the story of my life right now.
Right.
And, like an example of is like back in the day when I got conned, right? And I was like, everything's horrible. I've been conned from all my money and now I have to go do this. And then I can look back 20 years later and go, oh, that was one of the best things that ever happened to me because it put me on a trajectory for something that actually made a huge difference in my life in a positive way.
Absolutely.
And that's that looking back. So always like kind of circling around perspective, but not denying the feeling, the thought.
Right.
And I know for at least from what you said, like around the caregiver, the narcissist, the denial part, I'm curious when we talking about this topic is like for you, because you were denied in so many ways of how you were feeling and how to exist, right? And there was being in your family and meeting your family, I've been present and witnessed that. It's like, this is who Mark is. This is where he fits. And so there's a different Mark in some ways that has to show up and over the years that you've been with
it's
Mom.
like John Bradfall's metaphor of the mobile, the mobile that kind of like hangs in balance. And when you remove yourself from that mobile through like distance, like I did, 7,000 miles away, and through a lot of growth and development. So I don't really fit in their family mobile, and the whole thing gets to readjust now that I've removed.
Right.
But when I go back to visit, the mindset puts me back at the time that I left, which is around 18.
Yep.
And so then especially the matriarch and the patriarch will quickly rearrange and create all this chaos to rearrange the mobile, meaning the other participants in the family, to fit me back in.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it doesn't work. It's awful.
It doesn't work.
The experience is awful.
Probably painful for you and painful, again, for the siblings more than the parent system. Right.
So much of what we want to do can seem impossible. What are your grand ambitions, your greatest goals? The highest achievers among us are those still striving, reaching for something big, the ones who want to keep climbing higher. And for those with that adventurous spirit, there's a vehicle for you. It's called the Defender. The Defender is engineered to meet challenges head on. It's an icon reimagined through thoroughly modern design. With its compelling proportions and precise detailing, the Defender exudes confidence on and off the road. It's got a tough, rigid body design, and its durable, lightweight architecture provides extra strength, which can help you tackle any terrain and any weather. Whether you choose the Defender 90, the 110, or 130, which can seat up to 8, you'll have a vehicle that's ready to explore your way. With legendary capability and robust material design, that Defender gives you the confidence to embrace the impossible and push beyond your perceived limits. Explore their full lineup at LandRoverUSA.com. LandRoverUSA.com. Start your next adventure today with the Defender.
What I'm curious about is for you, because you had that, and then again, like going through military training, even like working in like highly competitive, like Wall Street and all of that. So then as you find yourself being on a spiritual path, doing a lot of therapy, teaching all of this, where do you feel the rub when you have like, I want to back to like the worm or, like where do you feel the rub of like, I want to be positive right now, but I'm having a feeling coming up, I
think and first of all, it's a practice, right? Especially like a lot of people listening are probably, interested in this video. If you did grow up with narcissistic tendencies in your family, or you've been impacted by that in your life, and so you've maybe experienced toxic positivity and gaslighting and these things. Or another example is just social media itself. Like social media tends to be a generally toxically positive environment because, you don't really feel the emotions that are behind all the happy, glad postings, right? It's like everyone presents this picture of perfection, but it's just not reality. And so I think it's very important, and I teach that you have to ground your positivity in reality, right? And so part of that, like you said very succinctly, is to be real that when things aren't going so well and you're experiencing, negative emotions, to realize that it's actually a positive thing to allow those emotions to be present and to be experienced. And one of the things that I've finally it took me a while, but finally come to appreciate is that much of the sweetness in life comes from the hurts, right? From the pain, from what you would call negative. And so I would be a proponent of like stopping the naming of unpleasant emotions as negative.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Now, toxic negative emotions, like to in a hurtful way to express anger or rage. That's negative emotion.
Yep.
But just because you're experiencing anger or you're experiencing shame or guilt, that doesn't necessarily mean it's negative.
Right.
It just is what it is. So stop naming it and categorizing it as negative, because the lessons that you can get and the empathy that it can build within you and the perspective that it can lead to are all very positive.
Yeah. And Marshall Rosenberg from Nonviolent Communication, right? He talks about that. Like all emotions are pointing to needs. And so underlying any emotion, it's like, they're not.
There's some need, unmet
It's
need.
letting go of that black or white thinking it's a good or bad emotion, but just looking at it as like, I'm having a feeling. So I'm having anger. Okay. So what's my need?
Right.
Well, I could just be hungry.
Could be hungry. You could be hangry.
I could be hangry, or I could need to feel reassured.
Right.
Now, if that's it, let's say you and I are on, a drive, somewhere, and I'm needing to feel reassured. Do I need reassurance from Mark if I'm feeling angry, or do I need reassurance from myself? Mm-hmm. And then,
this is where
that's like that
mindfulness as a practice is really helpful for being able to be present with and appreciate the entire spectrum of emotions. Yeah. From the negative to the positive. And I would like to kind of relate this to Dr. David Hawkins' spectrum of consciousness, or power versus force. It's just really it's amount of energy that is being experienced, or consciousness, life force, right? That's being experienced by your body at a particular time. Yeah. Some people are kind of trapped in very low energy systems, right? Shame being the lowest energy. He mapped that at like 40 on a scale of 0 to 1,000. And so if you're experiencing a lot of shame and you're trapped in shame because you had a lot of shame-based trauma in your childhood or in your life, then that's very real, and it's going to be very painful. And the way out is to courageously, right? Courage is the pivot point, is to courageously seek help from an expert who can help you really kind of understand like the roots of this, and to work with you to change the energy and the thinking and whatnot.
Pull it out to like. I always think of weeds, right? If you just pull the top of a weed out, it's going to grow back.
It's going to grow back.
But you got to go all the way to the end of the root system, really,
therapy,
and slowly pull it out.
Hypnotherapy, all that's really helpful for that. Mindfulness, the practice of mindfulness, because even if, let's go to the happy glad, even if you're part of like a perfect yoga community and you do a lot of meditation, like you are, you're going to get triggered, right? You still are dealing with the underlying conditioning and trauma of the body-mind system that you are, even if you have very advanced spiritual, metaphysical experiences and you have God consciousness, occasionally. If you have it permanently, good for you. That's called enlightenment. Yeah. But even in enlightenment, the body still has the conditioning.
Yes.
It doesn't suddenly become a saint. No. And it will get triggered.
Yes.
And it will get triggered into negative emotions. And so the spiritual leaders talk about this. The difference between the average person and a spiritual leader is a spiritual leader just watches it and goes, ha, look at that. There's that conditioning. They don't take it personally.
Right.
They just let that wave crash. But they still experience the full range of human emotions.
Well, that's what I was going to ask.
That's mindfulness, is to be able to watch without engaging.
Without the reacting, right?
Without the reaction.
So you can engage in the sense, just to like clarify, you can engage in the sense where you feel it.
Sure. So, thank you for that. I agree with that.
But not reacting in the sense of like taking action, or
it's a secondary level of action where you say,
self or other.
I'm so bad that I'm experiencing this guilt. Or I'm so bad, or you're so bad, right?
Yeah, or hey, you over there.
Creating the story, taking the story and blowing it up into this big drama. Right?
And I think that's, yes. And So that's like that question that I was asking you is like now, where you are in your life when you feel that rub of like, because I would say that you're good at reframing and saying, okay, this happened. It was seemingly negative or seemingly bad, and I'm going to take the lesson out of it. And I would say you and I are probably really similar in the way we want to get there as quick as possible because of the like this bad feeling and like, ooh, like and maybe again, even though we had totally different childhoods, like maybe some of that like sitting in whatever it triggers, we're both trying to get away from as fast as possible. I don't know if that's true or not. I might be projecting, but like, for you, with that like toxic positivity, do you ever find yourself kind of shifting into don't feel it still?
I think that is, and I'm speaking to the guys now, right? I think that's kind of the go-to mode for a lot of guys where we weren't taught to experience our emotions or we were taught that they weren't appropriate. They made us weak, whatever. And that certainly happened in my case. And so I can easily rely on that emotional control and deny that emotions are happening. And so for me, it's been a process of noticing that. Noticing when I'm clicking back into Navy SEAL, I'm in emotional control. I got to stay focused, do the worm process, stay on track, redirect, and move on. And there's great benefit to being able to do that. Guys need that, right? To stay focused on the hunt and being a warrior and whatnot.
Yeah.
But then you're cutting yourself off. I recognize I was cutting myself off from probably the sweetness of life. The most of the emotional ranges weren't existent for me. So I've had to interdict myself from interdicting the negative emotion and allow it to be experienced.
Yeah.
And even sometimes get help naming it. Like, you know this about my wife, Sandy. She's often be like, so how you feeling? I'm like, fine.
You're not allowed to say fine. I grew up with that.
And that's right. You were the one. So you can't say fine. It means
I grew up with her as a mother.
Fucked up, insecure, neurotic, and extremely, in denial, in extreme denial or something like that.
She told me as a kid, it was feelings inwardly not expressed. And it used to bug me so much. I'd be like, but I'm fine.
Fine. So fine is not a proper...
it's not an emotion.
It's not an emotion, guys. And if your girlfriend or wife says, how you doing? And you say fine...
Yeah.
That's not it. So don't do that.
Yeah.
But I still end up doing it. And then I catch myself and I laugh. I said, well, yeah, I know. I'm actually pretty good. This is what I think I'm feeling or experiencing.
Right. So you're still like finding the emotion.
Still finding the words for it, and I love some of those charts where like, oh, or lists of all these different emotions. I read through those. I'm like, wow, I wonder what that feels like.
Yeah, me too.
Very interesting.
The needs too. Sometimes I'm like, well, I don't know if I've ever experienced that need. Like in the list of needs. So and then going to I'm going to bounce over to the social media thing of the toxic positivity.
Yeah, well, that's such a big issue.
It's a huge issue, and we're seeing like this epidemic of severe anxiety, severe depression, more people medicated maybe than ever before, at least in the United States. I don't know what the statistics are like globally. Obesity in the United States, right? And we know that has to do with food too. But also I believe, especially with teenagers, and a lot of my friends that have teenagers right now, and the discussion is, that high risk for suicide because they see their friends having fun. And, and then I would say that happens to anyone at any age. If you're feeling isolated, alone, or if you're struggling in relationship with your own family, and then you see, oh, these people have a perfect family, or these people have the best life.
I think that we can blame social media, but I think we should blame all media.
Yeah.
No, I don't mean like Substack and this stuff, like what we're doing, but I mean like mainstream media.
Yep.
Large corporations and how they market, particularly the food and drug industries, and and our government, which props all that up and promotes it. So you could say that we have an extraordinarily narcissistic, media-driven kind of cultural influence, which then individuals just kind of play that out on social media by trying, pretending to be as perfect as what they see in the advertisements.
Well, you can see toxic positivity, right? Like snap, crackle, pop. They're happy.
It's perfect. People eating the biggest junk food ever.
Right. It's like fear. But I also want to speak to the leaders, right? The people on social media that are speaking as authorities,
influencers
as Spectre
who promote
experts, but are like,
positivity.
they have this great life. And
that's a huge disservice, basically, to promote a life that is not real.
Right.
Like there's nobody perfect.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as perfection. Everybody has a very unique set of circumstances and challenges and traumas. And so I think you just can't believe really much of what you see on social media.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? When it comes from that kind of, I'm perfect. Look at my abs. Like they're amazing.
Right.
They're probably airbrushed. You know what I mean?
Yes. Well, yeah, they're painted on. A lot of them are. They do that in Hollywood. I know that for a fact. Yeah. So to the actual process of toxic positivity. So I'll talk about one of mine, and then see where you go with this from the topic is. So for me, many years ago, and you already know this, but I had been meditating for at least 5 or 6 years at that point, was in a very toxic relationship, was teaching meditation, yoga, right, for full time. And so I had at least 500 to 1,000 people a week that I was speaking to about universal love and light and happiness and be present through yoga teaching, right? Because I had quite a few people. And all the stuff that was going on in my life, so I would override with it's all meant to be. This is happening perfectly. I want to allow this person, the toxic relationship, to be exactly who they are without interfering, because they're in their life process, showing up, smiling, and saying everything is beautiful and saying the perfect things. I mean, and in some ways, a lot of what I said was authentic.
You just described why I don't go to yoga studios anymore. It's just so false. Sorry.
Hello, welcome.
All you yoga teachers out there listening to this, I hope you're smiling.
Yeah.
Be authentic.
Be authentic. So, and then I remember there was always that dance of not wanting to impose my personal life, right, on my students. Yeah. So there's that boundary for sure. However, the override one, what I'm really wanting to hear your thoughts on, and back to the toxic positivity, was the overriding in the interpersonal, the spiritual bypassing. Yeah. Of everything's good, even though it's
the word
terrible.
That came to me. This is, again, I think, how a lot of spiritual communities have developed and how the teachings have come to the West, and then they got corrupted with the narcissistic, kind of tendencies of our culture.
The guru.
Yeah, and also the gurus were not necessarily authentic. A lot of the gurus were false gurus. They were projecting the kind of toxic positivity, and you can't, have these negative feelings and emotions. And so that's why they call that either an emotional bypass or a spiritual bypass. You're bypassing the shadow and denying its existence. And that's a false teaching. This is why some of the great spiritual teachers and leaders like Ken Wilber, for instance, for years, Ken Wilber said, basically, here's the process. You're going to wake up, right? This is wake up to, awaken awareness, wake up to, that you're a spiritual being having a human existence. But then we got to grow up. And growing up is growing up through stages of development, greater and greater sense of circles of care and concern, right? Starting from, a lot of people are stuck in egocentrism. A lot more are stuck in ethnocentrism, which is kind of like egocentric at a national or, maybe a racial level even. My people, not your people. But then you can grow into this world-centrism where you have great care and concern and inclusion of every human. And then you get cosmocentrism where everything is within your care and concern. And so that's growing up, right? Which is different than waking up. Waking up can influence growing up, but it's not going to suddenly, like we said earlier, having a spiritual awakening not going to suddenly make you a saint.
Right.
You still got to go through the growing up. And then there's this thing called showing up, and this is like karma yoga. Like how are we showing up authentically and in alignment with our calling, or what the yogis would call your dharma? And so that's showing up, and they're all really important, right? And so for years he was promoting these kind of three. And then just a few years ago, he came and said, you know what, I kind of missed something. There's cleaning up to do. And cleaning up is the acknowledgement that life is messy. And even if you're waking up, growing up, and you're showing up authentically, and you have that wholeness in those three categories, if you're not cleaning up, which means recognizing suppressed emotions, oppressed emotions, repressed, projections, childhood traumas, all the conditioning from all the stuff that happens at an emotional level, then you're not going to be experiencing wholeness, and you're going to have bypassed it.
Yeah.
And the challenge for that is because you're not experiencing it, you've suppressed it, which means you're projecting it. It's going to show up in some form in your life, and generally it's going to show up in the relationships you have with others that are close to you. Yeah. So the guru with his, having sex with his students, the spiritual leader, abusing his family or his wife or his kids. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's going to show up. And if you're in denial, it's going to hurt people.
Right.
And most people, like especially in the spiritual community, be like, well, I don't want to hurt people.
Right.
I can't hurt people because I'm perfect.
But there's definitely harm going on.
Closely and being willing to receive the feedback.
In a perfect world, we'd all get enough of the nutrients we need for high-level performance from our diets alone. But this is the real world, and it's not perfect. And truth is, everyone could use some help in continuing to find a new personal best day after day. And that means you need supplementation. For me, the first step has been nailing the basics. The momentous 3 are my go-to: protein, creatine, and omega-3. These are the 3 nutrients expert research shows as the foundation of long-term health. And if taken daily, this protocol supports every cellular function of the brain and body, from muscle recovery and growth to focus and energy. The momentous 3 is the easiest way to drive the biggest impact on your health span. Momentous takes it a step further, though. As a supplement company determined to bring trust and transparency to a space that lacks both, all their formulas are designed with human performance experts and are NSF and Informed Sport certified for use by professional and collegiate athletes. That means sourcing ingredients for quality, not just what's cheapest, and what's on the label is exactly what you're getting. They're driven by what they call the momentous standard, and it's become synonymous with the industry gold standard in quality and efficacy. So, if you're interested in making a true investment in your health, why not join the best in human performance and be part of the change in raising the bar on supplementation? Go to livemomentous.com and use the code DIVINE, D-I-V-I-N-E, for 20% off your new routine today. Again, that's livemomentous, LIVEMOMENTOUS.com. Use that code DIVINE. Thank you, Momentous, for sponsoring the Mark Divine Show.
The other part around that, just that was coming, because a lot of thoughts were coming as you were saying all that, was that, first you talked about the media, right? Mm-hmm. And the paradigms that exist. And, as a student of media, I remember learning that, in the marketing classes and all of that, is how do you sell things? Right. And we're a culture of capitalism at this point. And I would say even globally, even though some people aren't as influenced as the United States is by capitalism, overall now, because of the way we are
the marketing engines of capitalism use, positive psychology.
They do. And the happy
and
people,
right?
So
and happy
I always,
people. Yeah, it works.
Talk about one of your favorite subjects, but I always think of that as with the commercials for menstruation, tampons, I'm happy and I'm wearing all white and look at me, I'm having a great time. It's so not the reality for most women, right? And it's just smile and grin and bear it and yay. And I feel that way, and I've talked about this in this spiritual community. It's where if I'm having an off day, I still feel I have to button it up, right? And it's that's tragic to me, and I think that's why we have a lot of disease. Yeah. And then there's that other of okay, where do you? So there, you may also feel that, where you button it up, because there is appropriate places, professionally, if.
Right. Well, I think this is an important point is whether you're talking about a family environment or a work environment, especially post-COVID, people are demanding or wanting, desiring more authenticity, the ability to be more vulnerable and say, I'm having a bad day. I am on my period and it sucks. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It should be okay to say that.
Yeah.
But it may not be able to be right to say that in every single meeting, right?
Right.
Or, be the shoe drop that just sucks all the oxygen out of the room.
Right.
So there's a place to say that. There's a way to say that. There's a way to be authentic and vulnerable in an organization, and there's a way for an organization to allow that. Like the debrief is a great example. We've had conversations about the debrief, and this is how in the SEALs we did it. Like it was okay to have I'm having a bad day moments and, vulnerability and boy, I really fucked up. I don't know what's going on. That happens in the debrief.
Yep.
But we teach the team, and the culture is that doesn't mean that person's a bad person. It just means that person's having a bad day.
Right.
And they're going to do something about it, or they're going to get some help, or you're going to provide some help to them. So I think that we're heading into an era, and we can kind of wrap this up soon, where emotional development and discussions like this should become more the norm, and they should be part of leadership development, and they should be part of cultural kind of awareness, right? And so that cultures, whether again it's a family or a work culture, can be a community of practitioners who are working on themselves physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and professionally. And it's okay to have a bad day, or it's okay to, to be the person who's experiencing some negativity and some shame, and not to feel like you just have to put that happy, glad wrapper on.
Do you think
let it flow?
Yeah, as we wrap it up. So I have like a couple questions. Like, so if you're at the grocery store, someone says, "How are you doing?" and you're having a bad day.
If I'm having a bad day.
Do you say, I'm experiencing a challenging moment, I'm experiencing sadness, or do you say, I'm doing great? Because I think that's those social rubs.
I have trained myself away from, I'm
going
great all the time.
Going to the grocery
I'll
store.
just smile and be like, oh yeah, it's one of those days, man.
Yeah.
Rough one.
Yeah.
And then a lot of times I'd be like, yeah, I know what you mean. Me too. And immediately there's a connection.
Right.
So that's a great question. I agree with that. So if you're having a bad day, be okay with it.
Yeah.
Other people are probably having a bad day too.
And then like you're saying with the appropriateness, this is where I think emotional, and I know that emotional IQ isn't really a thing necessarily, but emotional awareness, maybe the growing up, the emotional maturity piece is knowing it's okay to say, I'm experiencing challenges right now and I'm feeling sad. And then not going into allegory about it for the next 45 minutes while the person,
go back to that's enough.
Right.
Let the energy flow. You do not need to create yet another chapter of your drama story that you're going to dump on somebody else.
Yeah.
Right. And then they're kind of left holding this thing. So
like that's
just
what
be
therapists and coaches
just be okay to let it hang there. Yeah, I'm having a pretty rough day.
Yeah.
How's your day going?
Don't have to explain yourself.
You don't have to explain it. You don't have to,
Because I think that's an important piece in there is like the not dumping on others too, right? If you're going to shift away from faking happiness all the time.
Yeah, that's kind of like the narcissist saying if they're having a bad day, then you're going to have a bad day with me.
Yeah, for sure.
Right?
For sure.
I got to share my suffering. That's not cool.
So going, one more question, and I think I have around the toxic positivity. And then you can.
We've plumbed the depths.
Well, I mean, I have a lot of questions about this because I actually was really affected, I think, by this, but more than many people, because I had a grandparent that wrote books on it, spoke on it, socialized me in it and I was inundated it, went to the New Age church at the age of like 6, so like crystals and everything. Like, so it was pretty exposed and it really sunk in. And it's like, so in that, like back to the spiritual practice, because this is what I love and you love to talk about the most. When we look at like Maharaji's teachings, right? Consciousness flowing through everything, speaking on that it just is. And like, what is toxic positivity if it just is? I'm curious what your answer would be.
I often couch conversations like this saying, okay, we can have conversations from the absolute perspective or the relative perspective. Yeah. So from the absolute perspective, right, everything is is like consciousness being experienced through individual points of awareness, and that would be you and me.
Yeah.
But the awareness that's looking through my eyes is the same awareness that's looking through your eyes, and it's the same awareness that's looking through your eyes. But that awareness and that life force is animating this body, which is conditioned to respond a certain way to the environment that it's in. And that body mind, the way the mind works, or the brain mind, is to construct a reality that has a perception of an individual sense of self. And that perception comes online at around 3 or 4 years old. And the name is taken seriously, and the perception in duality in the relative sense is that I am having these thoughts. I am a separate, individuated consciousness amongst other separate, individuated consciousnesses. And that's a false perception. So from the perspective of the Maharaj and the Ramana Maharshis and the Jesus and the Enlightened Masters, is that relative is like a dream. It's as real as, like when you wake up from a dream, you don't say that the dream didn't exist. It was real, but you don't also take it to be really real.
Right.
And so the perception of life in the relative sense and duality from the perspective of the absolute is that it's like a dream. It's not really real, but things are happening. And this is where you get the idea of kind of the happy dream. If with that perspective, you can look at it and be like, oh, I don't have to be attached to the fact that I grew up with a toxically positive, grandmother. I can see still when I get triggered by that, but I am not that.
Right.
I am awareness. I am life. I am the same life that's flowing through Mark and Catherine, right? But the conditioning has these traumas, and those traumas have little triggers. Now, the emotional development work of cleaning up is to try to release the trauma triggers and to understand, the conditions that cause maybe some of the negative emotions to linger and dwell because you suppress them or repress them. I'm still not sure what the difference between suppress and repress. It sounds a lot like to me, but anyways.
I'm still working out subconscious and unconscious.
And so you have more awareness and more mindfulness, which comes online naturally through a long practice of meditation. So you don't get caught up in it. You don't blame yourself. You don't have that shame and guilt for having the negative emotions. And this is really another way toxic positivity shows up in people is like, you feel like you can't feel that. So you feel even worse because of it.
Yep.
Right? You're not supposed to feel anger. So instead of that, you feel shame because you're experiencing anger.
Yep.
But you're not supposed to. And so with the perspective of the absolute, awakened awareness, or even just conceptually understanding that is helpful, you can look at that and go like, oh, that's just the conditioning. I just got triggered again. It's not who I am. And I'm not going to experience the secondary layer of shame or guilt as a result of the experience of not wanting to feel that anger. In fact, what I'm really going to do right now is practice this letting that energy move. Energy, emotion. Let it move. Yeah. Let it flow. Let me finally experience it without naming it and judging it.
Yeah, I found compassion is really important.
Huge. You got to have compassion.
So
for this
compassion
practice.
For the story of the past, and recognizing like I remember it differently than it really was, anyways. Like that's always one of my things. Like, well, but more importantly, like what you're saying, if I'm feeling angry and then I start to feel shame. Now you're feeling angry and shame, right? Is what you're saying. And so then it's like real radical compassion. Like, oh my goodness, like, wow, And then the way you would pick up like a little kid and just be like, oh man.
Yeah, just hold your heart like that. Be like, oh wow. Oh. Yeah. And how long you've been doing that to yourself.
Yeah.
Lay down your sword, right?
Yeah.
Just treat yourself with compassion and love and allow those things, a lot of the energy to flow. And eventually, the waves will become smaller and smaller until you're not affected by them.
And stay positive.
And then you can stay positive. All right. Thanks so much for joining us today on the Mark Divine Show with myself and the lovely Catherine Divine. See you next time. Hoo-yah.
Hoo-yah.